My psychotic sisters got their 10-year-old children to damage my phone, but their scheme backfired far worse than they could have imagined, resulting in major legal ramifications. After sidestepping my two nieces, who failed to push me into the water and instead ran into the pool at full speed, all hell broke loose. The majority of the other visitors began laughing, but their mothers, who, as previously stated, were extremely drunk, freaked out. Because I wasn't wearing swimsuits, I stood back from the pool and let others fish the youngsters out. My alcoholic sisters and their drunk husbands began yelling at everyone, including me, for not allowing them to have fun. They also yelled because the two children had been filming the feet with their parents' iPhones, which were now at the bottom of the pool. One of my brothers-in-law dove into the water to get the phones, but his BMI made this impossible. Nobody else offered to help, which was unsurprising considering that my sisters were still ranting and swearing at everyone. I informed my sisters that it was their obligation to watch their children, and that if something happened to them, it would have been their fault, not mine. Both sides used heated language. My wife and I fled after the other brother-in-law toppled down and face planted on the concrete, yelling at us. After we left, the celebration ended on a negative note. My inebriated brother-in-law, who face planted while ranting at me, had to be taken to an urgent care facility and have his face patched. He was too toasted to drive, so his father took him. Dad was really upset about this. Later that evening, my sister created a group text and said some extremely terrible things about my wife and me, including calling me the R word. Their husbands also made a few comments. My wife and I blocked the four of them. My mother called me. She was quite upset by what they said. I don't blame her for participating in the talk with her father. Because of the text, my parents insisted that my sisters and brothers-in-law come over the next day, without their children, to settle matters and establish ground rules. The nieces responded with an unenthusiastic apologies. I unblocked them since I assumed everything was settled. That evening, I received a text from one of my brothers-in-law informing me that the phones cost $750 and asked when I would pay for them. I responded, never. I grabbed a screenshot of his communication and forwarded it to my parents, explaining that we were done with this farce. We will no longer communicate with my sisters and their spouses, and they will not invite us to any future holidays or get-togethers where they will be present. Then I blocked the sisters and their spouses again. Everything went horribly wrong at that point. Dad contacted them and ripped a new one. Among other things, he informed them that the grandchildren were not welcome at his home indefinitely. My mother frequently provided free babysitting, which irritated them. He also prohibited them from utilizing the vacation house. This was a significant thing because they frequently stayed at that vacation cottage. My father revealed to them that my wife and I, not he and mom, owned the vacation house. This really frightened off my sisters and brothers-in-law because, as previously said, both of their families utilized the home frequently, including hosting friends for weekend trips. This was extremely out of character for my folks. They'd obviously had it. For reference, I never wanted my sisters to know we owned the property. We purchased it for my parents. They had always longed to live in the mountains. Keeping ownership private was simply a strategy to avoid conflict with my siblings. A few days later, my sisters and their husbands unexpectedly arrived to our house to apologize in person. We went out to supper, and they left a letter. A sister also called me at work. I left her a voicemail. I was prepared to avoid touch with them, but then things got a lot worse. I recently learned that my older sister and her husband, they have 3 children, have been living beyond their means for some time and are facing financial difficulties. To appreciate how crucial this is, consider that my sisters believe my parents are extremely wealthy. They believe our wealthy parents will leave them everything they own after they die. Therefore, they are unconcerned about money. However, my parents are not wealthy, and this puts my older sister in considerable financial difficulty. Anyway, I discovered that my oldest sister's family has maxed out their credit cards and is behind on their car leases, to the point where one is ready to be repossessed. Her spouse had previously boasted about earning a lot of money per year, but it turns out to be roughly half that amount. He revealed all of this to mom on Tuesday because they need a loan and because, for the past 3 years, instead of staying at the vacation home on a regular basis, she has been renting it out once a month or so and pocketing the money. We're talking $2,000 or more for a weekend and at least $4,000 for the week. She has already had to cancel one group since she is no longer permitted to use the facility. She's frightened that they'll lose everything. My parents are not in a position to provide a loan. My other sister was aware of her renting out the apartment but has never said it. I assume she's done the same thing since when I went up there to drop off an ATV I'd worked on. There was a family there who claimed to be staying with my sister and her family and had gone to town for some reason. At the moment, I let it go. I assumed she had loaned the house to some pals. I had always wondered. I learned all of this from my parents, who are really concerned. Mom is more than dad. He's mostly upset about everything. I know dad feels betrayed, and I suppose he's humiliated since he can't help his daughter. He did say that as long as it is up to him, the daughters will not be using the vacation property anytime soon. My parents told me what was going on because they expected my sisters to mount a full court press on me next, and they were correct. My sisters returned to our home on Thursday, this time without their husbands, and waited outside the door until I arrived. I had to choice between fighting with them in public, causing a commotion if I went in without them, and allowing them in. So I allowed them inside. The older sister told me a lie about why I needed to let them use the mountain again right away, and the younger sister agreed. They also stated that I had been a bad brother and that I needed to stand up and plan on paying for their children's college fees because that is what families do. I let them pitch their story before calling them out based on what my parents told me. Things went downhill from there. There was denial, sobbing, cursing, yelling, you name it. I swear my ears are still ringing. 2 days later, they left after approximately an hour. After that, I showered and lay down. When I woke up, my wife was home, and her first words were that she needed to block more phone numbers since my sisters were blowing up our phones with new ones. Anyway, the next day, my parents informed me that they had finished managing the holiday home. Essentially, my parents delegated ownership for the property to me and informed me it was my obligation from that point forward. With the vacation house's responsibility placed on my shoulders, I drove up to it and padlocked the entrance gate shut with a heavy-duty chain and the best lock I could find since I was tired of them all. I'm the only person with a key. I assumed it would be enough to ensure that my siblings left the area alone. They'd definitely perish attempting to trek 400 yards uphill to the house. I've also taken a few more efforts to safeguard the location. I also reset all of the door keypads and set up new codes. Security cameras were installed yesterday, which is actually quite cool because the technician persuaded me to install a high-resolution one that overlooks the valley. I also added a heavy-duty lockout on the water shutoff and drain valve. I didn't inform anyone except my wife that the water is turned off, and only we have the keys. Thankfully, I did this because a few days later, I received separate calls at my office from both husbands pleading with me to let them use the house as they always have. The older one had gone up with some mates for a guys' hangout but was unable to enter due to the gate lock. He felt upset and ashamed about being kept out. I am sure he would have smashed the lock if he could. Throughout his conversation, he alternated between being forceful and playing the victim. At one point, he threatened to pull that fence out of the ground. He also revealed that they had been renting it out to a few friends because they needed the money, and that I was hurting their business and should pay their guest deposits. My sister seemed to be forcing the other brother-in-law to call. He didn't argue when I instructed him not to use the place again. In any event, I informed them they couldn't use the space and not to ask again. To ensure that they did not try anything shady with the holiday property, I hired a gentleman to monitor and inspect it. He has access to my camera feeds and physically inspects the premises every week or two. He also has a camera feed from a residence near the beginning of the private road that captures still images whenever a vehicle passes by, and he transmits photos from his walks to everyone once or twice a week. Moving on to how my sisters and brothers-in-law were doing around this time, my parents informed me that the oldest sister and her husband, who had been living beyond their means, were getting out of their SUV and large truck leases and selling their jet skis and other items they had never needed. That's going to be incredibly difficult for her. She's a braggart and won't enjoy being seen in something older, smaller, and less expensive. My brother-in-law's identity is also closely tied to his truck. He even has a little tattoo of the truck company's insignia, which frankly, is one of the many reasons we never hung around. And then everything went wrong, and my two brothers-in-law made a decision that completely devastated their and my sister's life. They broke into my holiday home and were arrested. They were charged with breaking and entering, property destruction, and conveying threats, all of which are Class 1 misdemeanors. I refused to drop the charges. They were remained in custody a day after their arrest. The next day, I learned the complete story. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, my brothers-in-law visited my holiday house. They used an angle grinder to cut through the chain on the driveway gate, damaging it in the process. They attempted to enter through the front door, damaging the lock set and gouging the door brutally. They ultimately gained access through the utility-level entrance and a locked interior door. They also broke into the barn, but I'm not sure why. When they exited via the front door, they were greeted by sheriff's deputies and David, the man I hired to guard after my property. David receives notifications from the camera system whenever there is action. He noticed what was going on and contacted the sheriff's department. According to David, the brothers-in-law attempted to lie their way out of it, but the deputies did not believe them. Breaking into an empty property is a major offense up there. Typically, meth heads ransack the place and sell everything. When the brothers-in-law were detained, they freaked out and threatened to beat the crap out of me. Not a good idea to do in front of cops. David and the sheriff's office attempted to contact my wife and me to determine what we wanted to do, but we were spending the day with her parents and had left our phones in the car so we could be on vacation. So they scheduled the brothers-in-law for everything, which is what I would have requested anyway. The brothers-in-law called their wives from jail, who unsurprisingly, freaked out. They called my parents and attempted to call me. They're barred. They attempted to contact a lawyer up there to arrange bail. Given the rural setting and the holiday weekend, this was not an easy task. The older sister has no cash and her credit cards are maxed out, so if they made bail, my middle sister would have had to pay for both husbands. I ended Friday by calling the sheriff's department and informing them that there was no misunderstanding. The brothers-in-law had no right to be on my land, and I intended to bring charges. I waited until Saturday afternoon to phone my parents. They were both pretty rattled by it, especially my mother. My sisters had browbeaten me into telling the cops that everything was a mistake and that I wanted the charges dismissed. I flatly refused, telling them that I wouldn't do it until I met with an attorney and was compensated in full for whatever it would take to completely fix everything. My mother was crying hard by the time we got off the phone, which made me feel terrible. My father advised a complete restart, but he also believed they should pay for the harm. I then left messages with two legal acquaintances, asking them to recommend the best counsel to take on my sisters and brothers-in-law. The following week, I received a courier-delivered envelope at my office. It contained a signed letter from both of my brothers-in-law, as well as a $5,000 cashier's check. In the letter, they expressed what I believe was a heartfelt apology. Among other things, they acknowledged breaking in, said it was wrong, stated that the $5,000 was to cover the damage, and that they would pay more if it cost more. They also stated that they would stay away from the vacation property unless my wife and I directly invited them. They also begged that I do everything I could to get the charges dropped as quickly as possible because they both could lose their employment and would agree to a restraining order or or whatever else was required to do so. There was more, all conciliatory, but that's about it. To say this was shocking is an understatement. It was a complete 180 from their previous behavior. I'd already scheduled an appointment with an attorney to discuss suing my brothers-in-law for the damage and seeking a restraining order. I called him and informed him what I had just received, and he agreed to meet with me at the end of the day rather than the next week, but advised me not to deposit the check. We met for around 2 hours. He ultimately recommended that my wife and I reach a settlement and mutual release agreement with all 4 of them, including sisters and brothers-in-law. He told that if we filed a lawsuit against them, we would almost probably win, but it would take 2 years or more, there would be significant upfront legal bills, and we might never get paid. He further stated that we may keep the $5,000 even if we did not release them from liability. He's drafting the deal, which won't be ready until Monday. The arrangement will include what amounts to the civil equivalent of a restraining order. I'd previously instructed my property manager to prepare a bid to fix the damage. I called him after the meeting and requested that he provide me with an estimate as soon as feasible. I got it Friday. He estimates it will cost roughly $4,000 to fix everything. The majority of that is for the entrance door. On Friday, my attorney contacted each of the brothers-in-law, explained what we were proposing, and urged them to get their own attorneys. They both agreed on it. The middle brother-in-law informed him that they could afford to pay for either the damages or a lawyer, but not both, and that a lawyer would make no difference given that they had no defense for what they had done. His main concern was if the charges could be withdrawn. From what I can tell, they're willing to do or sign anything to make this all go away. On Friday, my attorney also called the district attorney's office to negotiate dismissing the charges. I got the prosecutor's name and left them a message, but I haven't spoken to them yet. He believes they will drop the charges because the brothers-in-law are paying up and have no priors, but he is not a criminal lawyer. He also advised me to be prepared to drive up there and tell the prosecutor in person that I wanted everything dismissed. He also encouraged me to maintain no contact with my sisters and brothers-in-law, particularly for the following 6 months, and that it would be critical to adhere to the terms of the agreement in future dealings with them. I'm presuming the brothers-in-law's change of heart is because they've realized what's at stake for them, how much it'll cost them in legal expenses and fines, and so on. They may potentially face up to 120 days in jail, which is exceedingly unlikely. As I previously stated, one of them has a security clearance for his employment, which could jeopardize his safety. Though this is a last-ditch effort to maintain their normal lives, receiving the written apology was strangely significant for me. I never expected that, but it seems to matter a lot to me. The money does not feel very essential right now. I'll take it though. Also, I'm quite sure my middle sister and her husband came up with the money. The cashier's check is from the credit union for the workplace where he works. Last week, I met with my attorney, went over the agreement, made a few small changes, and he forwarded it to my sisters and brothers-in-law. It included a stipulation that they pay my attorney's fee of approximately $3,000. They were upset about it and attempted to negotiate it away, but he informed them they had to accept it as is or there would be no contract at all. We'd sue them for the money they made from renting out the property, wear and tear, repair costs from their break-in, mental distress, lost income from having to deal with this, attorney fees, and whatever else we could get. He also informed them that I would work hard with the DA's office to prosecute all charges. Short version, they came in and signed. I was not there. I'm told it was a stressful situation, that the middle brother-in-law appeared to have seized command, and that at one point, he warned both of my sisters to quiet up or he was walking away from the whole affair, making his own arrangement with us, and the rest of them could all go to hell. They provided another cashier's check for $2,500, claiming it was all they had. It's close enough that we'll accept it as final payment. My attorney also told me that everyone was quite chilly and rude to one another, but they all managed to hold it together long enough to sign and leave without making a big deal. I traveled up to the vacation property early yesterday to see the damage and meet with the DA's office. Seeing the destruction made my blood boil. It was just senseless. I was so angry that I was willing to eat the cost of repairs and do whatever to ruin their life. After lunch, I visited the DA's office. I hadn't booked an appointment and had to wait long, but I was able to speak with the assistant district attorney who was handling the case. The short story is that because I do not want to prosecute and the brothers-in-law have already paid for the damages, they are willing to dismiss all charges save trespassing, which in this case will be a Class 2 misdemeanor. Brothers-in-law will have to plead guilty and pay whatever fine the judge imposes. I've also been told that if they dispute the trespassing charge or even fart in public up there, it will end badly for them. It helped that the brothers-in-law did not fight arrest. If they had, no charges would have been dropped. I also stopped by the sheriff's office to thank them for arriving so promptly and everything. I wanted to thank the deputies personally, but only spoke with the dispatcher. I attempted to meet with David, the property manager, but couldn't reach him. A few notes. The agreement contains a no contact clause. Essentially, if any of them appear where my wife or I am, or vice versa, whoever arrived latest must leave immediately. No communication unless through solicitors or other mutually agreed upon third parties. I get to retain anything they make from renting the vacation home, my huge give, unless there are any tax ramifications, for which they will be accountable, and we liberate each other from all other liabilities up to the present. There's more to it than that, but these are the highlights. My wife and I will sign the agreement later today. After then, I can't discuss most of stuff, but I can talk around it.